For years, TikTok's fate in the United States has hung in the balance, pulled between viral popularity and national security anxiety. Now, a deal reported by the Wall Street Journal points to a way forward for the app's 170 million American users. A U.S.-led consortium, fronted by tech giant Oracle and private equity firm Silver Lake, plans to acquire an 80% stake in TikTok's U.S. operations, sharply reducing the influence of Chinese parent company ByteDance. Why does ownership matter so much? ByteDance is based in Beijing, and U.S. officials fear Chinese authorities could force the company to hand over American user data or manipulate TikTok's recommendation engine to spread propaganda. Those worries spurred Congress to pass a 2024 law, signed by then-President Joe Biden, that gave ByteDance an ultimatum: sell its U.S. arm or face a nationwide ban. Since then, negotiations have lurched forward in fits and starts. The current framework was hashed out by Washington and Beijing, and President Donald Trump, still treating the app as a potential security risk, has extended the divestment deadline to December 16, 2025. It is the fourth extension this year, meant to keep the service live while lawyers, bankers, and diplomats finalize terms. Under the proposed structure, a new U.S. company would run TikTok in America. Oracle, Silver Lake, venture firm Andreessen Horowitz, and other American investors would collectively hold 80% of the shares. ByteDance would fall below the 20% ownership ceiling required by U.S. law. The board would be dominated by Americans, with one seat reserved for a U.S. government appointee, giving Washington an inside view of corporate decisions. Data security is the consortium's centerpiece. The plan builds on Project Texas, an arrangement that already stores all U.S. user data on Oracle cloud servers housed in Texas. If the deal closes, every video, like, and message sent by an American user would live on American soil, under the legal jurisdiction of a U.S. company. Most people might only notice a prompt to download an updated version of the app that looks identical but operates entirely on Oracle-managed infrastructure. That leaves the algorithm, the secret sauce behind TikTok's stickiness. Negotiators say ByteDance will license the technology, while U.S. engineers rebuild and maintain the recommendation engine for the American app. Beijing has signaled it will allow the transfer of intellectual property rights, but U.S. officials remain wary of any arrangement that lets Chinese engineers peek under the hood. Until the new code is fully separated and audited, questions about influence operations and hidden backdoors will linger. Several approvals still stand between the deal and the download button. Both President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping must sign off on the final terms, and U.S. lawmakers are expected to scrutinize the agreement before it takes effect. For now, the videos keep scrolling, but the real drama is unfolding in boardrooms and briefing rooms as the two superpowers try to write the rule book for one of the world's most influential apps.
Welcome to AITV News. Minneapolis is reeling after two separate mass shootings at homeless encampments left at least 13 people wounded in just 12 hours. A stark snapshot of the city's escalating struggle with gun violence and homelessness. The first burst of gunfire came shortly after 11 a.m. Monday near a busy transit stop at East Lake Street and Stevens Avenue. Witnesses say an argument inside a cluster of tents suddenly turned violent. 5 people were shot, one of them critically, before the assailant fled. Police had barely finished marking shell casings when, around 10 p.m., a second, deadlier attack unfolded 2 miles away at South 28th Avenue and East Lake Street. More than 30 rounds tore through the nighttime camp. Officers discovered a man and a woman inside separate tents, each with gunshot wounds to the head, and 6 additional victims sprawled among scattered belongings. 4 of the 8 suffered life-threatening injuries. Investigators believe at least one resident may have returned fire, and while they processed the scene, a tent went up in flames, adding to the chaos. No arrests have been made, but detectives are exploring a possible link between the 2 shootings. Standing amid the flashing lights, Police Chief Brian O'Hara voiced his exasperation. "Here we are yet again in the aftermath of a mass shooting. This is not normal." He pointed to the city's thriving fentanyl trade, where, as he put it, disputes are settled with guns. According to O'Hara, the lunchtime shooting began as a quarrel. The nighttime attack was likely rooted in narcotics. The second encampment sits on private land owned by businessman Hamoudi Sabri, and the tragedy has reignited a bitter standoff between Sabri and City Hall. Sabri allows roughly 30 unhoused people to stay, insisting he is filling a gap the city has left unaddressed. He describes the camp as a hub where people can find help. City officials paint a different picture, labeling the site a public health nuisance. They have fined Sabri thousands of dollars and recently authorized a lawsuit demanding he clear the property. Mayor Jacob Frey called the shootings tragic and unacceptable, yet not surprising, noting the city has spent months trying to shut the camp down. Within hours of the gunfire, he ordered its dismantling. "Enough is enough. If the landlord wants to sue us, we will see him in court." City crews moved in with garbage trucks and heavy equipment, and attorneys are now seeking a temporary restraining order to fence off the lot and keep tents from returning. The dual attacks are the 4th and 5th mass shootings Minneapolis has seen in the past 3 weeks. The drumbeat of violence is rattling nearby neighborhoods. One resident living steps from the second camp said he regularly sees drug deals outside his front door and now worries every time his children walk to the bus stop. The episodes also highlight the dangers faced by those living outdoors. Officials say encampments often end in violence or fires, yet many residents distrust city shelters or find them ill-suited to their needs. After the second shooting, only one person at the camp accepted an offer of indoor shelter. The rest dispersed into the night, belongings crammed into shopping carts and backpacks. As investigators piece together what happened, Minneapolis confronts a familiar but urgent question: how to safeguard public safety while offering real options to people with nowhere else to go. For now, police are still searching for suspects, lawyers are preparing for a courtroom fight, and dozens of unhoused residents are once again in search of a safe place to sleep.
In Nepal, a generation raised online just demonstrated that a digital revolution can swiftly manifest in the real world. This is the story of how Nepal's Gen Z, fueled by anger over corruption and a sudden social media ban, brought down their government in a chaotic 48 hours. For years, frustration had been simmering among Nepal's youth. They observed a political class enriching itself while offering few economic opportunities. This anger was amplified online, where images of politicians' children, often called Nepo babies, showcased extravagant lifestyles, starkly contrasting with the struggles of ordinary citizens. A political analyst described the nation as sitting on gunpowder, just waiting for a spark. That spark came on September 4, 2025.
The government, led by Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli, abruptly banned 26 popular social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and YouTube. The official reason was their failure to register with the government. However, for many young Nepalis, this was a blatant attack on free speech and an attempt to silence growing dissent. For a country where many families depend on money sent from relatives working abroad, these platforms were also vital lifelines for communication. What happened next was an explosion of fury. On September 8th, protests began peacefully. Thousands of young people, many still in their school uniforms, filled the streets of the capital, Kathmandu. But the peace didn't last. Security forces responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition. The situation turned deadly, and the protests spiraled out of control. Enraged by the violent crackdown, demonstrators fought back. Government buildings became targets. Parts of the Singha Durbar, the main administrative center of the government, were set on fire. The Parliament building and the Supreme Court were also torched. The private homes of the President, the Prime Minister, and other high-ranking officials were not spared from the flames. The city was in chaos. Faced with a full-blown insurrection, the government crumbled. On September 9th, just 48 hours after the protests began, Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli resigned. Other ministers followed suit, leaving a sudden power vacuum. The army was deployed onto the streets of Kathmandu to try and restore some semblance of order. What makes this story unique is how the protesters organized. In a truly 21st century move, they turned to a platform primarily known for gaming. Using the chat app Discord, a youth group called Hamin Nepal created a server named Youth Against Corruption. This digital space became their headquarters. They used virtual private networks, or VPNs, to get around the government's social media ban and coordinate their actions. But they didn't just use Discord to organize protests, they used it to practice a form of digital democracy. In an unprecedented event, over 10,000 participants joined debates on the server to choose a new interim leader for the country. They shortlisted 5 candidates and then held a virtual poll. Their choice was Sushila Karki, Nepal's first ever female Chief Justice. This process wasn't perfect. Organizers had to deal with infiltrators who tried to disrupt the voting, including some who wanted to restore the old monarchy. The perspectives on this whirlwind revolution are, as you can imagine, starkly different. The ousted Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli had initially mocked the protesters and their Gen-Z identity, a move that clearly backfired. For the protesters themselves, the feelings are complex. One organizer, Tanuja Pandey, spoke of a mix of pride in what they achieved, but also trauma, regret, and anger over the violence and destruction. The newly selected interim Prime Minister, Sushila Karki, has pledged to restore trust and ensure a fair transition. Her government has already promised to give money to the families of those who were killed during the protests. The international community is watching closely. The UN Secretary-General has expressed deep sadness over the loss of life and has called for a full investigation. The aftermath is a nation grappling with immense challenges. The human cost is high, with reports of over 70 people killed and thousands injured. The economic cost is staggering, with the destruction of government property estimated to be in the trillions of Nepali rupees. A new political landscape is emerging from the ashes. New elections have been called for March 2026, and the rise of non-traditional youth-backed figures could permanently change the country's politics. This instability is a major concern for Nepal's giant neighbors, India and China,
who both have significant strategic interests in the region. The events in Nepal are now being compared to other recent youth-led movements in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh.
It suggests a growing trend in South Asia, where digitally native generations are no longer willing to accept the old ways of doing politics. They have the tools, the motivation, and the anger to challenge the established order, proving that a revolution can be organized and a government can fall in just 48 hours.